Just, we don't need to have that done beforehand, do we?
I don't think we have to do that. Do y'all? What?
Okay. But
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and type it in because I think it'll be helpful to be able to go back and read like everybody's key takeaways. Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Okay. Well, who wants to start? Share out theirs.
Not I, said the cat.
No. Okay. Well,
I
can
can go.
I just go ahead and do mine? I hate going, if I go after first, then I'm just thinking about mine the whole
Okay.
time.
Yeah,
So,
get it.
okay. So, and if I'm totally off base, I apologize. But basically mine was a action research, and it was empowering parents through an action research parenting program. And I thought it was pretty cool because they did it through a case study method where they sort of aligned. There were actually only 4 participants in the study, and it lasted over 3 semesters. They met weekly for an hour and a half. And then they did a more in-depth case study of 2 of the participants who had similar backgrounds. They both had a master's degree in information technology. They both had 1 child. And they just sort of did more of a nuanced, went more in depth into their background as to what their takeaways were from the way the program was set up. They had 2 questions they were looking for. One was for the participants to reflect on the process of action research, and how they felt about how it went, where they came up with the question. So like the researcher was not leading this. She had the people come up with, like they identified the problem behaviors that they wanted to sort of research and identify in their kids. And then they would collect the data, and then they would sort of analyze it and look to see if there were any patterns or trends. And then they would kind of design their own like response, their own action research to their identified problems. So like they would reflect on the action research, the process as a whole, and then how they felt empowered at the end of it. And the cool thing about the 2 case studies was one of them really enjoyed like the individual aspect of it and the self-reflection and the journaling. That's how she benefited most. Where the other one said it was the group discussion and like the practical ideas and the opportunities to bounce ideas off of other people, and sort of the validation of their input for her ideas. So it was definitely that group piece. So I just thought it was interesting. It was like the very same study that was conducted, but participants, through, they did all of the different, they collected through email communication. They did a reflective journal that they did daily at home, and then they did like group interviews. And so it was just kind of neat to see how different people, took away different aspects of the program. It was beneficial for them. So, I keep trying to go back and think about what we're talking about with like the professional development for the culturally responsive teaching, and just how we can set it up so that, so that the participants can get the most out of it. Let's see, what else do we need to talk about? The thing that stood out to me, the way this was set up, was that they were, instead of just like getting some research, and reading some articles and then just having it in theory, they actually went back to their homes and implemented the research. Like, okay, I'm going to collect data. I'm going to track this thing and, see if it's actually an issue. And I'm going to practice it in my environment. And so I didn't know if that should be part of our discussion in terms of like the PD. Like, I don't know that we've defined the type of PD, if it's going to be just sort of the one and done, or if we're considering, the PD where it can actually be, an action thing. Because Adam, weren't you saying, like, it's, didn't we have that discussion where it was, it's hard to say that your self-efficacy has increased when you're not actually yet doing anything? So like my biggest takeaway from the article was that they were actually practicing some of the things that we're learning as part of the cycle, the plan, do, observe, collect, like the whole thing. They were actually playing it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would make our case stronger, is if the teachers had a chance, to actually put it into play. I don't know if that's like the second cycle for the action research or not, but anyway, like we're just kind of at the research stage for the PD for us, right? Like the teachers aren't ever getting a chance to act on it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we hadn't really talked about a timeline.
Okay. So anyway, but yeah, just the way this whole thing was set up, they had a chance to, actually apply it to their own lives and then come back and talk about it. And I thought, what a great PD that would be for, to go in and like actually see how other teachers handle things and to talk about it and have that sort of group response. It might just be something we want to consider. So anyway, that was mine. I'm sorry. I know that was kind of a roundabout way to talk about it, but
It was great.
I'm still just processing it. Did y'all have any questions?
I guess were the interviews were they structured, or was it?
No, they were open ended.
Okay.
And it was so they did them in the group, and then they also did them one-on-one, and then they allowed the daily reflection in the journal and email correspondence. So it was a whole lot of communication in lots of different settings. But the coolest thing was that the parents actually got to collect data so that they could, what they call it, deconstruct reality. Instead of just like an imagined, like, oh, I think this is how it's going to be, or I think this is the problem. They actually like identified one specific focus and then went home and collected data so that they could then, is this really an issue? And looking for trends and patterns. And, that could be something that the teachers do in PD. Like they select one specific topic and then they go back into the classroom and then they identify, well, how often is this actually happening, or how often am I actually doing this, and then come back to the table to talk about it and get that peer interaction and input. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I was just kind of going back and forth between the two, trying to apply this case to what we're trying to develop. So anyway, that was me.
I had a similar experience. Do you guys mind if I go second?
Go ahead.
Nope.
Go for it.
So mine was about, it's specifically about social workers. It was done by a British researcher. And they use Icelandic social workers because of their, one, he had access to them through another researcher, but two, their willingness to take part in the workshops. And what he did was he took 10 social workers and 2 psychologists, because they work side by side in Iceland. They put them through 27 individual interviews. And the big goal that they were looking to figure out is, how do social workers perceive childhood? How do they construct the idea of what children are, and how does that idea contribute to the social worker practice? And as they dug deeper, they were curious, how do the experiences of children going through social work, whether it's because of their families or whatever, how do those perceptions impact social worker practice? And so they interviewed, I think it was 12 current children who either are in social work experience or previously, between the ages of 10 and 18, and for their ideas, their perceptions. And from that, they developed questions that they asked social workers over the series of 27 interviews and workshop days throughout the year. And it gave social workers time and a chance to reflect on, like, oh, we don't use their perceptions, or we use it often, but only in certain ways. And so, like Lisa, I kind of found it interesting to think about, what if we did a professional development that was kind of an ongoing, like a book study that met over time, and then we could, just use teachers who agreed to participate, and we could focus on how they felt their communication was being impacted as a result of being a part of like a book study or some kind of professional development that is manageable, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
But it was very
like
constructivist. That. It was very, very much about, let's build from the ideas of the kids who are experiencing social work up to the people who are practicing social work. And they didn't make any grand ideas or proposals so much as they just talked about how it influenced the social work practice and perceptions.
Okay. But I kind of like that, though, just in terms of whether or not we want to look at, if we were to open it up instead of, doing a blanket PD that may or may not apply to the whole staff, but do it, based on, choice. Just, hey, anybody who wants to participate, and then they can sort of identify like specific things. And if it was, whether it's a book or like they identify articles or, they become the experts, and they go back out into their classroom and observe each other and then come back with actual data and say, this is how it played out and this is what I saw.
Yeah.
So like their perception of how, like their self-efficacy would actually be, I could see how those two, like what you were saying and mine, they kind of go together.
Yeah, actually, something Margaret said when we met a couple weeks ago about how teachers who are seasoned or experienced, like further into their career,
Not seasoned, right?
cured is I think the word we went with at the
Cured.
end.
Yeah.
But how those teachers may not have had any education
Yeah.
when they went through their formal master's programs, but now as practitioners, they could use some PD, or might be the first experience
Yeah.
for them. And you can talk about how it influences their perception of their communication with their
Yeah.
students.
And if they're kind of guiding it themselves, there's going to be a whole lot more buy-in because they're the ones that are kind of directing the learning.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool.
But any questions about the Icelandic social workers?
I don't think so.
How'd they pick Iceland, just out of curiosity?
So it was a British researcher who worked alongside an Icelandic researcher, and they were able to isolate a group of social workers from that area.
Oh, that's cool. I think I want to go to Iceland to do some research. I'll have to work that out. Cool.
Please, you want to go next, or you
Sure.
want me to?
Oh, I'll go.
Okay.
Okay, so I did the one on the integration of social media in the classroom, and I found it kind of annoying that a good portion of this article, they gave like a pretty detailed summary of what action research was. So I kind of had to grit my
I
teeth
did the
and
same thing.
go through that.
I
I
did
thought,
too.
okay, interesting. But this action research was done by a doctoral student, so I thought that was, what a coincidence. But basically, she was using, it's called Ning. I've never used it before. That was like the social media format that they were using, and I guess it kind of comes across like Facebook. Like there was like a main page where the kids could post and talk to each other and other stuff like that. But she taught like probably like a computer class, but I think it was called like some sort of technology class. So she had access to it within her classroom. And there were 3 phases to the action research that they did. So I kind of liked that. So you could kind of see just a little bit of difference. And it covered 3 different semesters. And I think the first semester she did 7 classes. The next one she did 5. And the last one she only did 1 class. But you can kind of see how it all wrapped up in the end. And in the end, she kind of showed that there wasn't, at least through her study, she didn't really see any difference between students interacting and not interacting compared to traditional teaching versus social media integration. But what I did think was, I don't know, it was interesting how they measured it. To me, I haven't ever seen anything like this, but they did have, like, she was keeping a journal and, just kind of documenting, well, I saw these kids talking to these kids today or whatever, but she used screenshots for part of her data collection to kind of, I don't know, see what kids were talking about, who was talking to who. And then the whole thing overall, she was doing weekly reflections, there were midterm reflections and end of the term reflections. She was also getting feedback from other teachers and, just her independent journal and field notes of what she was observing. So there was a lot of different data collection that I hadn't considered before, but I guess in an online format, you could consider that, which I don't think we can use that for our action research, but yeah, it was interesting, but she started off with saying, the research is saying that social media is obviously more prevalent. Kids are using it more. And you would think that just because of that, we should be integrating it more into the classroom and it would be beneficial. And there are different platforms, so it's pretty readily available for most people to use. But just overall, there wasn't a big significance to it compared to traditional teaching. So
that was just, what were the data points though? I mean, just the reflection, like, I mean, were they looking at just teachers' perceptions of incorporating it, or did they have any like actual, like, you know, test data? Or
that was the fuzzy part for me, because I thought, okay, what are the real questions? Because I guess it didn't really scream out the questions to me as to what she was wanting to address.
Oh, okay.
But in my head, this is what I've decided, just kind of looking at it overall. She intentionally used her own classroom to do this, and she intentionally started with, I think, the 7 classes because she wanted her research to show, you know, what it would look like with a full-time teacher implementing social media into the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So she wanted to know if it would make an impact on students communicating with each other, on them completing their work, on how they interacted with her. And of course, it was easier in her classroom because she had the resources too. So I kind of thought, this is the yearbook teacher coming at you. And I'm thinking, okay, this research would not be the same for a teacher who did not have it readily available. And it did highlight earlier in the study that the kids that were involved in it, 13 to 16 years old, and again, the 3 classrooms, but it did mention that the kids were like mid socioeconomic. So we're not really talking the lower kids. And I thought, okay, interesting. Like, I don't know. I kind of would have liked to see a bigger variety of the kids involved.
And I'm just wondering, I think Dr. Constantino has turned me off to the word impact, you know, because she was like, so, you know, no, you can't say impact for action research because you don't have enough. I mean, that's like over years and years. Right. So like every time I hear the word impact now, I feel like, you know, having a little panic attack. I'm just curious, like, what were they saying in impact? Like, it would have an impact on the students. Like, what sort of impact were they thinking? And I'm wondering if, like, she's picked these articles so that we can be more intentional and like hone in on our question, you know, so that it doesn't seem as, you know, broad and, you know, because to me, for that, saying, oh, does it have an impact on kids? That seems really vague and fuzzy to me.
Well, and I'm wording it wrong. When you say that, I'm realizing, okay, I should be more specific. They wanted to see if that would improve student involvement in the classroom, student collaboration and communication between their peers, and, you know, just overall to see if it made a difference for her using that social media platform in comparison to the traditional teaching modes that she used in the past.
Okay. That's interesting. I would have thought, you know, because like with all of the Google Classroom and all the, you know, things that you can get on in the Google Docs and do all the collaboration, I would have thought that it would have had a positive, you know, improvement. But you're saying it really didn't over traditional approaches?
No. And, you know, I would say that's my own experience. I thought, heck, these kids were basically born on social media. They don't know how to use Microsoft Word. They don't know how to do anything. They don't. I'm like, how are you guys this generation? Right. They don't. I don't understand.
They just know how to click YouTube.
Yeah.
You know, that's true. Okay. That's funny.
And take videos. Sorry, I'm a little social media out.
That's true. I'm glad you didn't have to read that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's being used in the classroom, especially in the gym. So I did an environmental education action research, immigrant children in school spaces, and to influence their growth with immigrant children. The study came out of Canada, so it was interesting to hear the Canadians talk about the immigration, the children, the immigrants, because it took a complete, like, immediately I'm thinking U.S. immigrants, and then when you find out it's Canadian and you're looking at there's a French Quarter and there's, you know, these different languages, so that made it, I think, easier to step back from. So basically, when I first read the article, I thought the school was messed up outside and they wanted the school to look prettier. So the best way to do this is to have kids do the work so that they could get the funding for it and call it an outdoor classroom, was my very first take on the article. But then as I started to read a little bit more, I looked at the purpose of this was to work on capacity building. Like Felice's, it continuously talked about that this action research serves this action, like explained action research like 400 times. But what I did like about it is that it was a very clear cut timeline of exactly what was going to happen, the dates that it was going to happen. It was almost like it was a gardening club that was going to impact their entire school. And what I found really interesting was that they had one of the pieces of qualitative data was students were to go out and take pictures of the school building in areas that they felt like needed to have beautification done. So that they would, and they brought those pictures back to the table for everybody to look at, and then they started like, one of the themes was them working together to come up with areas that they could actually do the beautification. So I thought that was really cool, using that. I never thought about like taking pictures and using that as data. So they had field notes, research sessions, 3 questionnaires from pre and post, questionnaires from the garden committee members, or green committee is what they were called, but I'm calling them the gardening club. And then they had focus groups that would deal with the teachers.
Step out just for a second, I'm sorry.
Some of the things that were mentioned, the article like was going along and explaining some things, and then it kind of started about like, oh, I was disappointed to learn this, and I was disappointed to learn that. So the author was very engaged in the article, as far as it was obvious it was for their own action research. It was cyclical, and I answered the questions the best that I could understand them. I was a little hazy with alignment and evidence. And I just struggled with it because it seemed to me like it followed the 5 why questions that I created. So it seemed like it aligned. Now, if I didn't have any of the rest of the article and I was looking at it from the get-go, it may not have aligned. But obviously with past tense, it seemed to follow along in this plan. But like I said, the thing that stood out the most to me and the most important to me out of this whole thing was the very clear-cut action plan. Like, this date we're doing this, and this date we are doing this, and it was set up over the course of the entire year. And I found that that spoke to me because it was very organized and it was very clear. And a lot of it was student perception. So whether or not the students were definitely participants. The students actually drove the action, and whether or not the students' self-concept of not only what they were doing, but how it impacted others, and how they perceived how others felt about what they were doing. I thought it was also interesting, and I know this is getting too in depth, that some of the boys dropped out and girls joined back up. So they ended up with more girls than boys. Sorry, Adam, I equated that to middle school boys are lazy and they don't want to do work.
People.
Huh?
People are lazy.
No, just the middle school boys.
Okay.
So anyway, I've got it all in this document. That's it. That's all I know.
You know, but there's a theme here for most of ours where it's like they didn't decide what they were going to do before they got to group together. So like in mine, you know, the participants, they all kind of talked together and decided, you know, behaviors that they had in common and they saw as a concern. Where you know, they're walking around and they're taking pictures and identifying problem areas that they want to beautify. And so then, you know, they kind of come together and come up with specific steps. We didn't have that in ours. Like they just met every week over the course of 3 semesters to just, you know, so I don't know if, you know, it wasn't a clear cut, okay, we're going to work on this problematic behavior for 2 weeks and then move on to a different one. But it was definitely like they constructed it as they went. There wasn't like an agenda at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of the way yours was, Margaret?
They had a very clear, like, starting with October 22nd introductions all the way down to June 19th research session. Like, it was like each week it was very laid out, or each bullet was very laid out on what they were going to do. Like,
but then that was based on all of the stuff that they had collected up front, like all of the, you know, all the pictures. These are all the areas, and they kind of came together, and brainstormed different projects, and then they mapped them out.
No, they actually, they came in the idea that this green community they were going to have introductions, they were going to present the purpose of the green community, and the whole idea was to have students kind of do an outdoor classroom type thing to have immigrants feel like they were part of the school.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they did a pre-questionnaire, then they did a capacity building activity, what's good for your environment. Then they did selecting the school area focus, and that's where they brought in, they discussed going out and taking the pictures. Then they went out and visited the environmental organization. Then they discussed their stewardship roles. Like, it is like down to the lot. Like, it is very planned out. It is very methodical. And it's kind of hard for me to even explain it because, like I said, originally when I first read the article and the thing, I was like, okay, basically the school was ugly and they needed some plants. And then as I got kind of looking at it, I was like, okay, no, what they're trying to do is they're trying to infuse the immigrant children into the school, make them feel like they have ownership of the building and improve their self-concept, build their capacity and capacity building for the whole school. And they're doing it by making the school look prettier.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like twofold.
Okay.
That makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's like a really good plan. Like, when I was first reading it, I was like, geez, easy.
It's very,
Okay.
I mean, it's like very constructivist. Build off of their experience to develop school engagement or school community.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, and that right there, couldn't that be part of our plan? Build off of their own experiences to, you know, build capacity and, you know, community engagement. I mean, isn't that kind of ours?
Yeah.
Also?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, we talked about developing that communication piece between teachers and students. So I think
Yeah.
having, you know, teachers reflect on their experiences and having those reflections maybe drive
Yeah.
some type of like interaction, like in a recurring meeting that we have or interview questions that we do.
Right. Just so they can talk it out. And whether it's like mine, where the lady just, you know, being able to be introspective and just, you know, with the data that's been presented and that she, you know, hears, you know, that's going to be impactful, or through the group conversations. Yeah. So I think that's going to, actually, I'm really glad that we did it this way, because then the next 30 minutes, we need to look at how we may need to tweak our action research. So I think all of these ideas, I'd like it if, I mean, I'm going to take my kind of takeaways and plug it into Margaret's nicely shared template. And then maybe we could see the themes and then see if what we need to tweak and move forward for ours.
And Margaret, where did you share that?
I sent it to your email for William and Mary.
Yeah, she just did it right before the call, so it should be in your email.
Okay. I'll refresh.
If it's not there, then I sent it to the wrong person. So I hope they enjoy.
I don't have it either.
Let's see.
I do have a flow chart that you shared with us earlier.
No, I see it. Wait, AR South Hall. She sent it to, is that right? Yeah, AR South Hall at email.wm.edu, and then FA Miho. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yep.
At email. So y'all should have it.
Let's see.
Is it the action research?
It's called Jigsaw Mod.
called Jigsaw Mod. It's coming from my New Kent one because that's where I accidentally started it.
I'm forwarding it just because I have it up to see if
Okay.
y'all have
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah, I don't.
Share with 2 people, edit, send. Okay.
Adam, I may have misspelled South Hall.
2 H's.
2 H's.
Yeah, everyone does it. Should be 1
Okay.
H.
Okay, you should have just gotten it. I just forwarded it to you.
Okay.
So, and actually, if y'all don't mind, just because we're at the 45-minute mark, my daughter's 24th birthday is tonight, and that was her that just called, and we're getting ready to do like a FaceTime happy birthday with her.
Oh, fun.
Do we have a lot more?
I think we've shared each of our pieces and we've answered our 4 questions. Does everyone feel good about their answers?
No.
Yeah, I like it, and actually, I'd like
Nope.
it to review everything. You know, I'm going to put it in. I'll do that tonight in a little bit. I'd like to set, you know, another time so we could see how we could apply this and make any changes to our, you know, our own topic.
Yeah. You said you couldn't do. Somebody said they couldn't do tomorrow, right?
I can't do tomorrow. I work Tuesday nights.
Okay. I have parent-teacher conferences on Wednesday, and we'll be there late, so I can't really do Wednesday.
Okay. Thursday?
I'm free on Thursday.
I'm good with Thursday.
I'm good on Thursday.
Margaret?
Hold on.